Hey everybody, welcome to the Entrepreneur Experiment podcast with me, Gary Fox. The Entrepreneur Experiment reveals the secrets and systems world-class founders use to master their business, their body, and their brain. Today, we've the first ever time we've a family business expert. We're chatting to Philip Mackeown, former director of Musgraves. You will all know Musgraves as one of the biggest and most successful family brands in Ireland. Philip gives us an absolute masterclass on what it is to work in a family business, to leave, come back, and all the complexities that go with having and working in a family business. There is so many lessons in this one. Here's my chat with Philip Mackeown. But first, quick thank you to my partners.
Thanks to my partner, Square. Everything your business needs, like payments, point of sale, e-commerce, inventory management, chatting endlessly about the weather? Well, you're on your own there. Square. Everything your business needs. Almost. Visit square.com.
If you're a regular listener of the pod, which I hope you are, you'll know I've been hosting the podcast from Iconic offices for quite a while now, and things have gone really, really well. So well, in fact, that I'm now a member of Iconic offices, working and recording from one of their spaces. This means I can vouch for the benefits it gives to any business. On that note, Iconic offices have given me a number of exclusive complimentary day office trials from my audience. So try it out for yourself for the day. Bring your team. No catches. Simply go to the web link in the description and enter Gary23, so it's Gary23, to claim your complimentary office for a whole day. It's a pretty fantastic offer. Thank you, Iconic offices. One of the most frequent questions I get asked on this podcast is, where do I find a mentor? And I've never fully had the answer, but now I do. Introducing Mentors Work, a fully funded mentoring program designed to help your business thrive, brought to you by the Small Firms Association in partnership with SkillNet Ireland. Imagine having a series of one-to-one individual mentoring sessions, along with upskilling workshops to network with your peers and learn from experts, as well as a bespoke business plan. And the best part, it's at no cost to you. Join over 2,000 Irish SMEs and see how the award-winning Mentors Work program can help your business to thrive. Places are limited though, so apply today at mentorswork.ie. Program is fully funded until the end of 2023, so get your application in now. Philip, welcome to the pod.
Good morning, Gary. Thank you for having me, and a big shout out to your listeners as well. Thank you.
Good morning. It's brilliant to have you. Philip, as we chatted there over coffee,
yes,
what kept coming to mind is you've lived a life. You've lived a life, which is kind of the richest thing I think you can say about anybody.
Well, I hope so. I hope I've only lived half a life, because I'm only 57, so I've got a bit to go. But yes,
you've packed a lot in though.
Well, I once sat down with a career guy who, when I was trying to find out where the hell I was going to go next, and he looked at what I'd done and where I'd been, and he said, "Yes, your career pattern can only be described as episodic." So episodic is possibly what it is.
Episodic, I think that's every entrepreneur. I was literally voice noting a friend of mine coming in today, and we're just chatting about that exact thing of the next stage. Yes. But bring me back to the very start.
Yeah.
Where did you start working?
Well, I started working first in London, finished in college, like a lot of people in the mid to late 80s, went to London. I started doing accountancy in London. Possibly didn't suit me, the numbers piece, although I'm fine, but I found the studying and the exam side of it a bit dull. Worked there for 2 or 3 years. Met some very interesting people, audited businesses going under, audited the Royal Academy, audited various manufacturing businesses. But then I suppose at the time, was always in the back of my mind, I think, the sort of family business calling. And then I came back to Ireland in the very early 90s and started working in our business.
What is that business?
The business is Musgrave, Musgrave Group. People would know it more by the brands, Supervalu, Centra, Daybreak brands, and also Mace in Northern Ireland. We're fifth generation, founded in 1876, so there's a long piece of legacy there.
That's absolutely wild. When I was doing the research for this, I was like,
yes.
When you think about the world events that have happened since they set that up to now, and it's still absolutely thriving.
Yeah, one of the things I like to think about, it was interesting, I was sitting in a hotel in having lunch yesterday in Cork, about to get the train, and I looked out and looked right down across to Mackeown Street. And on one side of the street was a part of our former business, a former part of our business, which was called the Metropole Hotel, which is now the Gresham Hotel. And on the other side was a chimney, which was originally part of my other side, which was part of the Thompson's business. But I think the bit that really talks to your point about what it's gone through is that what my grandmother told me about her father standing in his house in Cork, watching the burning of Cork, and back in like a little over 100 years ago. And kind of wondering, well, like what happens next? So there's always something happening. There's always something evolving.
I was so excited to chat to you because so much of business is rapid now, and there's booms and busts and crashes, and companies blow up in 5 years and literally then blow up the next year. You know, they go from 0 to 100 million and then go from 100 million to 0. You look at Silicon Valley Bank last week.
Yes.
Goes from billions and billions under management to 0. And when you think of it like that, the Musgrave story is even more impressive. The legacy and just the actual structure of just standing for that long and thriving. Was it always the path for you to go into the family business?
Possibly not. I mean, I think I thought about it a bit when I was in college and then afterwards. It wasn't much spoken about. I think, to be fair to my father and the family then, it was very much, listen, go and find what you want to do. But I suppose, and one of the things that I write in the book, which we'll come to in a minute, there is that impact of ownership bit where you have that self-imposed maybe interest, maybe duty, maybe I should be looking at this, but nobody has told me expressly not to piece. So you can almost fall into it by accident. So that's probably a qualified yes.
It's interesting that he didn't put pressure on you, that he let you find your own way. Do you think that's why you did find your own way back?
I think I did, to a point. I don't think I was particularly successful at that. I mean, I went abroad, worked for a while, probably was aiming to stay away for longer. I think when you say find your own way, that's one side of the coin, but the other side is to understand and know what it is you might be going into. And again, I write quite extensively on that. I call it informed opportunity. So I think looking back, possibly while I was keen to go in there on merit and sort of just get on with it and, roll my sleeves up, and I certainly did that in the early years, all the way through, but certainly in the early years, very much, finding out that the business is an enormous business when you're already in there possibly isn't the best way at it.
Mm. Was it daunting when you say there, because Musgraves now is an absolute behemoth, and probably was then as well, just on a different scale. Was it a bit daunting going where's my role? Where do I fit?
Well, you're starting out. I mean, you don't want to be thinking too far ahead when you're that age, because you're going to, sort of drive yourself mad, aren't you? I mean, I think at that stage it was interesting. It was, roll up your sleeves and sort of get on with it. And you're also learning who everybody is, what is there, and you're also at that stage still at the very start of one's actual career. I mean, we're talking about events that happened 30 years ago. I think that the daunting pieces are finding out really how the business works and being prepared to go in and sort of get your hands dirty to actually do that. I think the daunting piece is certainly for successors, and we'll come to this in a minute, is very quickly you realize that you're not on the inside track, or you're not maybe part of that informal network, and you have to learn ways to sort of navigate that and get around that. And my approach to that was always twofold, was work hard and be respectful of other people. And if you can do those two things, well, then I think you will go a long way to bringing most with you, not all, but possibly most.
Did you feel, it's an interesting point, did you feel you had to work harder because of the name?
Well, I think when you go into a family business, you always have to pay it forward, because you go in there and possibly you are in there because of your name. I mean, you are in there, in many ways because of your name, but you might be interested in what the business is, what it contains. But certainly to people looking at you, they are going to know you like initially by your second name, aren't they? I mean, that's possibly why you're there. The challenge is to become known for your first name over time. And that's not an easy thing to actually do. But I think if you keep that in the back of your mind, and something I come back to in the book, I think, you can make it work.
I love that. You want to become known by your first name.
Yeah.
That's a great way of putting it. And I think there's a really powerful message there. It's a very simple statement, but I think it's very, very powerful. You want to be known for your first name, not your second name as to why you're there. I love that message. So when you went in, was there any pushback? Was there any kind of like, oh, this guy?
No, I mean, and I think most people, going into businesses where, that I've spoken to, other successors, I mean, you've got to remember that, the people who are working in the business, the people who are customers, the people who are involved in many facets understand that it's a family business, and I think want to see family involved, because if you look at a family business, what do you need to have continuity? I mean, you need three things. You need asset growth, some sort of economic engine. You need some sort of consensus in the family, but you also need family talent, however you describe that. Of course, when you're young and you're going in there, you don't necessarily see those things yet. But to answer your question, certainly you are. I mean, I don't say you're going to be received with open arms, because of course people are going to be watching you. People are going to be trying to assess you. I remember working in one warehouse where one guy, this was up in Dublin, where wear their thoughts on their sleeves. He said, Macker, you're XYZ, like I won't repeat the expletives, but you're all right, he said to me. And as we went on lugging boxes.
That's the ultimate compliment, though. But you're all right.
Well, yeah, but you want to be, but you don't want to be a pushover either. I mean, you're there for a reason. You're there to learn. You're there to try to pick up what you can. And again, it is about beginning to develop your own credibility and understanding what it is that is going to make you tick. And also, I think, discovering whether you have an aptitude for the type of business that your company is in.
That's true. Because what did you start doing?
Grief. Well, I started on the shop floor in a warehouse out in Walkinstown. In fact, it was at the back store with Joe Bosnett, with Peter, and with Brian. I can still remember them as clear as day. They were extremely generous to me. I just got stuck in. I did try to drive a forklift, but I went and put it through a bag of flour, so that ended that aspiration. So I was never going to be a forklift driver.
But you started physical, lad, so that's what I'm interested. So you had an accountancy background now, but you started physical.
Well, you have to do that. I mean, you have to show to people and show to yourself that you're prepared to work. I mean, there's no point trying to get involved with a family business, I think, of any size, unless you're prepared at some stage to go in and do something like that. Because I think it does, illustrate a willingness, and also it means at the end of the day that, you will never be in a position where somebody can turn around and say to you, well, you're asking me to do X, Y, Z, but you didn't do that, did you? And you're kind of saying, well, actually, yes, I did. And I may not be particularly good at it, but what you're trying to do is just get a handle for business working. Yes, business can be bricks and clicks and, internet sites and data and all the stuff, but behind that is real people doing real work, I think. I mean that in a more physical sense than anything else. Obviously, things have changed now. But I started on the shop floor in cash and carry, and then I worked in 3 or 4 supermarkets around the country. I mean, you name it, I've done it. Some of the memories are of fire in one of the supermarkets, packing frozen food freezers without any gloves for 3 hours at a go, working with very, very good entrepreneurs, working with other entrepreneurs who perhaps weren't so good. And I just learned the value of really just how a tight team can work, and also how the sort of franchise operation was actually put together. And it was a very interesting time, absolutely exhausting as anything like that. I remember talking to my grandfather, who ran a bakery. He says, you know what, at some stage in your life, you're just going to have to work really hard. You're just going to have to roll up your sleeves if you're going to get anywhere. And I think for me, that was it. And I found it particularly difficult because I have a problem with one of my legs. I've overcome it, but being on my feet for 14 hours a day certainly wasn't ideal.
But that grounding, though, I think that's so interesting, because you want to prove it to yourself and others. So you're simultaneously doing two things. But I think that grounding and the physicality.
I don't think I thought of it as proving. It was more. Yeah. I mean, maybe subconsciously, yes. To be fair, but it was also, you've got to learn how things work here. How the bits fit together, what the essential elements are of the way that we do business. But I think that the moment of truth, of course, comes out. I mean, you can go on looking at things, you can go on doing your training, doing your induction forever and ever, and I do sort of write about this, but it's sooner or later you have to take some sort of responsibility. And my first element of responsibility was managing a group of loss-making stores. And if you want to learn pretty quick about business, is to try and turn around a business that isn't, or a part of the business that isn't doing particularly well. It's a real eye-opener. But I remember going into a room with a lot of managers, the managers running these stores, and I've never seen a more deflated group of people in all my life. But I think once they got the message that if this turnaround didn't work, it was my ass on the line as well as theirs, because I certainly wasn't going to be hanging around if it didn't work.
Right.
I would have been shown the door. As it happened, it did, and we worked through it. Interesting pieces in that was ending up in the Labour Court fighting my case about a store we had to close in Tala, to opening a store in Greystones. And I think the other piece was seeing that, people simply led with a good degree of honesty and a clear vision and just a lot of energy. It's just amazing how people's sense of worth and sense of achievement can be changed, and people can feel it belong. Now, it's always going to be short term, maybe, but it certainly opened my eyes, and also the value of just bottom line responsibility for something. Once you can do all the talking you like, but once you have a bottom line that says this is working or this isn't working, or the cash balance, certainly in our business, that's a very great leveler.
Did you open that store in the main street in Greystones?
No, well, I wasn't at the time. I think the pit that I was running or in charge of at the time did have initial responsibility. I was a little out of the running leading up to it, in all honesty, because we'd had our first child had been born, and she'd been born with an illness. So we had to come up to Dublin and do all the hospital piece in Crumlin Hospital, and that took about a month. So in that time, so I wouldn't like to claim too much credit for that. but I do remember doing interviews for people around that time, and by that stage I think as a group, up to a point, solved the problem or at least mitigated the losses. And then I was said, well, the next opportunity is in Spain, so go and learn Spanish.
As transitions go, not the hardest sell, I would imagine. How did you, just before you move off that point, how did you turn it around? How did you go, right, loss-making stores, okay, guys, you got them all in a room, guys and girls, got them all in a room, went, right, here's where we're going. How did you bring that to fruition?
Well, I think first you have to get a handle on what reality actually is. So you've got to go off and say, well, how big is this problem? I mean, it wasn't catastrophic in terms of the greater, wider size of the business, but for me it was pretty big. So, I don't want to overinflate it as for size. It was part of these, a small group of stores as part of a much bigger operation. But still, it needed to be solved, really just to clean them up and to make them ready to be franchised out again, which is the model. I suppose find out how I suppose a number of things. One, recognize what the problem is and then, get the right numbers. Two, give some clear idea or vision, if you want to use that overused word, to the managers of what it is we're all trying to achieve, but also dealing with them. And I think thirdly, giving them some skin in the game. And I remember sitting down trying to work out, well, how can I put some sort of incentive system in there? If we're looking at numbers, we're looking at budgets, we're looking at absolute percentages, but we're also looking at cash side. How can we put something in there that these guys, it was all guys at the time, would say, okay, I think there's a light in. Why? Because there are other groups of independent franchise who own their own stores and had groups, and that was the way that they were running their businesses. So I was saying, well, why aren't we doing the same? We shouldn't be any different. So and of course it was just a lot of measuring. I mean, I think the other piece in all that is you have to close the loop. And I remember the one thing that really worked, which always fascinates me because it seems to get overlooked, is just have a report, even if it's written by hand or part printed and filled out. Now, of course, everything's technical, but have something. In our business, it's get the key information back on a weekly basis.
So that's closing the loop for you.
Of course it is, because that forms the basis of any conversation. So you sit down and you work it through, that essential piece, I mean, it really is your sort of plan on a page in a way. But the problem primarily was about controls, it was about leadership, it was about confidence. Of course, all the marketing side and the branding side and the vision side, all that was part of the overall wider franchise package. So I suppose it was a classic turnaround, really. I mightn't have called that that at the time. The wider people I was working with probably saw it as a very small part of the project, or maybe were waiting for me to fall flat on my face. But I just kept at it, and from memory, I mean, you're talking about things that happened, 30 years ago. We certainly, as a group, I think, sorted it out.
There's three beautiful. There's a lovely framework there. Get a handle on reality, give people skin in the game, and close the loop. There are three fundamental. Because to ask you, that's quite a broad question I asked you, but you're able to succinctly bring it down.
I suppose the other thing, Gary, there weren't podcasts then like yours to listen to work it out. I mean, I had to learn this myself. I had to think about it. How do I go about dealing with this challenge? Which again comes back to that family business leadership. You're the leader there. Now go and do it, even though you may not be in a very exalted position, or people will still be looking at that. But at the end of the day, it was what I was being paid to do. And of course, there were a lot of other people around the room who had good ideas, and I was led by a very good guy who was prepared to give me my space, and I think treat me from my own name, my first name rather than my second name, and a guy I made quite a good relationship with as a manager, because that's a challenge too. You're trying to work with the people above you.
Well, this is why it's called the entrepreneur experiment, because that's what all businesses are, and all entrepreneurs are experimenters. They go, try, test, do. And we talked about over breakfast. Yeah. The people that I want to talk to, they go do. They think a little bit about it, but they're mainly biased towards action. So you've kind of summed it up perfectly. So then your next move was the sunny shores. Very nice.
I worked in Spain for, excuse me, I went down to Spain, worked for sort of 3 years down there, managing stores. The family started expanding. By then we had 2 kids. And I suppose worked there with own stores again. Difficult environment because, of course, you're working through Spanish. But I still love the country and I speak the language fluently. But I think looking back on it there, probably went over there like a little bit prematurely. And I think from memory, I went over there on my own.
How did Musgraves end up in Spain? Like, what was the transition over there?
Well, I think at the time it was a business that had been purchased. I mean, the aspiration at the time, and I believe it's still there, was to own businesses off the island of Ireland. And
de-risk from just
better way to do it than just to buy one and see where it goes. But it was probably opportunism too. It was members of a similar network of like association of wholesalers in Europe. This wholesaler down there, Salvador Lopez was his name. He became godfather to our second child.
Wow.
He didn't have any successors, and his business, in fact, had mirrored our business growth in starting off with bulk items over there. It was olive oil, rice, coffee, pasta, olives. And had developed cash and carries much the same as we did but smaller scale, and then got into franchise, full store service retailing, but smaller stores, but huge percentage of fresh foods. But he didn't have any success, so he sold. So I was there for 3 years, came back, and then I project managed Rocha Stores at the time, which was the Rocha Stores group, which was supermarkets all around Ireland, into Musgrave. And then I suppose at that stage, Gary, I began to think, okay, I've certainly gone around and moved stuff, moved different things, worked with it. I wasn't entirely clear about what I could do or where I could go next or what that looked like. And sort of put up my hand to go and do an MBA because I was at the right age. And you got to remember, you're talking about a business which had a lot of very highly qualified, let's say it was almost all non-family, highly qualified individuals.
Did you feel imposter syndrome?
I don't think imposter syndrome, but because I was, as I said, I was prepared to go in and do the hard work, and I was prepared to be respectful and learn from other people. I suppose the bit that I felt was I wasn't quite sure where, what I wanted to actually do next. Maybe there were other things surfacing that maybe I was thinking to myself, well, I've done this and maybe it isn't quite what I thought it was, or maybe there are other elements that I want to go and look at.
How long were you in the business? How far into your career at this stage?
At that stage it was about 9 years. So I suppose I was up to my very early 30s. And that's when I left. I said, I'm going to leave. I'm going to do an MBA because I need to take time out to sort of pull all this hard-earned operations experience together and sort of knit it together to find out where it is and what I'm going to do next. And so that's what I did. And I went and did that and took sort of 2 years and then didn't go back and then had a number of jobs outside the business after that.
What was the MBA process like for you? Did that give you the time, the kind of scope to sit back and think, right, this is what I want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think from an academic or a content point of view, it was very straightforward because I'd worked in a very well managed, well structured business. I think what it did do, it gives a couple of hidden things. I mean, MBAs come up for a little bit of a savaging at times, but it seems to me people miss the point. The reason you do an MBA, I think, is to recognize that you're in this transition period, but it's to sort of help you get through it and to work through it. So it helped me put a sort of line in the sand. Secondly, it also gives one access to a really interesting network of new possibilities and new people, which, certainly 2 or 3 of the jobs that I did after that led really directly from that. And I think thirdly, it also gives one the time to really work it out, well, what am I going to do and how am I going to pull all of these pieces together? Because back to, whether you're building an actual career, it is going to be episodic, or whether you're an entrepreneur and you've got the business to a certain stage, I think it does pay. Not easy to do, to actually stand back, but not easy to do, and some might see it as a bit of a luxury. Again, nowadays you can do these things like an awful lot quicker and a lot more flexible way, but I still think you need to give yourself the time and the headspace to let this natural process happen. But I was living in Cork. At those days it was flying up. I did the MBA on the airplane. I had all my stuff organized up and down because we had that stage 3 young children down in Cork, and just got on with it. But it also gave me a real confidence for me that I hope I'm right in saying that I was, at one or at the same level or had done the same amount of things as my peers on the course, only one of which other person actually came from a family business background. So that was interesting.
What was your next step?
Well, my next step was, I think, to be honest, like a period of trying to work out what it was I was going to do next. And I suppose that led me in sort of 2 directions. One was the sort of teaching and sort of academic side, where I started doing visiting lecture teaching in UCC, really in the areas of retail strategy, but then got into the area of family business management. And I began to get involved. At the time, we had a family business centre based in UCC, so I was involved in that. And the other area that I got into about 5 years later was, the family business came sort of calling again. And I looked at this and I said, well, hang on, I've put in 10 years of hard graft. I've gone off and got a master's. I've learned a different language. This wasn't to go back and sort of work in the business, but I did, through a competitive process, it has to be added, join the board as a family director. So as a non-executive director. And I did that for 10 years.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in, like that famous movie quote.
Yes. Well, there is that, but I think it was. I think at the time I felt I could make a genuine contribution. At the time, I knew it wasn't going to be what I thought full time, but it gradually became that. But it also allowed me this other piece of doing the lecturing, teaching, and I also worked in a number of other projects outside, and allowed me sort of work through that over a period of time. I have to be honest, I'm probably looking back, I probably did it 10 years too early because I was still chomping at the bit to be going and sort of doing stuff.
Okay.
But having said that, there was a silver lining because when I was involved in the Family Business Centre in UCC, ostensibly that is to provide a focal point for family businesses to look at all the issues that are pertinent to them. That Centra became no longer, it became wound up around the time of the financial crisis. I then still thought, well, hang on, there is something I can still do here in this space. And I said, well, I want to do something that I'm going to lead, and so to get on with it. So I'd come across a non-profit network called the Family Business Network, based in Switzerland, with peer-to-peer networks for families in business. I think it's that stage in about 30 or 40 countries. I said, well, why don't we do that here? Because at the time, there was nothing here really for family business, and no real recognition. I think a very limited understanding. And I said, well, I think I'm the right person to actually do that. So I was doing the role within our own business on the board, which was quite onerous, I have to be honest, but I enjoyed it.
What does a board member do? Because you read about it in the Sunday Times every week. Oh, so-and-so has been appointed to the board. I was like, that sounds cool.
Not really. I mean, a board's job is to make tomorrow's company out of today's.
Oh, that's beautiful. Oh, that's not the first time you hit people with that one.
Well, that's what it is. It's about looking at the future. And now, of course, you are spending time. Well, the first thing is you've got to learn the business. So you've got to go back in and do an induction. And as somebody, so I did that again. I went around the entire company, met everybody, because I felt it was part of my role. And I felt that any family member coming into the business like that should do that and show that we're still involved, that we're still committed, that we're still interested. So I remember going, and as one man said to me, I think he was up in Belfast, he said, Philip, listen to the water. Go and listen to the water, which is a lovely way of saying, just go and talk to people. Meet them on their own grounds. I mean, you've got, and of course, listen, let's be perfectly honest, not everybody wants to see the boss's son come into the room, and you have to be able to actually deal with that. Yeah. But at the same time, you've just got to go straight at them, and not in an aggressive way, just go up and say hi. Because again, this is a thing that I write about in the book, public and private. Publicly, maybe people aren't, that kind of thing. Oh, well, should I go up? Or they're a board member, or there's all this aura and stuff put around people on boards, which a lot of it's nonsense anyway. But privately, they're absolutely thrilled, and it's a great to do. And of course, the other benefit doing that, going on a board, is you find out where your experts are. You find out really who are the people, not the consultants who come in, not the people with stories and long PowerPoints, but you find the people in the guts of the business who actually say, I know how this bit works, or yes, and I go, well, I heard about this. No, well, actually the issue we're really dealing with is that, or this is what we did 30 years ago. It's still working today. Let's keep it going, and hard to do. And sometimes you get lucky and you find people who really know what's making the business work. And it's interesting, I see in the Financial Times or in things I read now where people are giving out about middle managers and why do you need them, and other people are pushing back. Well, they're the people who know how your business works. And if you lose them, you just don't have one, to be honest. So I think make tomorrow's company out of today's it's a very simplistic way of it, but that's possibly it. Obviously there's a lot of stuff behind. I think the other bit about being on the board is clearly, you have the sort of, if you can say it, a business as usual bit up to a point. But of course, when the wheels come off, like a financial crisis and the market changes, like if you have a problem in a certain division or a certain individual senior level isn't performing, that's when the board has to roll up its sleeves and just meet a bit more frequently than it's been used to. And that's another part. But, I did that. I enjoyed it. But to be honest with you, Gary, there was that entrepreneurial piece in me, or that bit to say, okay, I can go and do that. But where can I bring my second name into a place where my first name interests and energies and hopefully talents can be used? And that was in looking at this family business support piece again. So I went off and I suppose, to be honest with you, became a social entrepreneur. I said, right, I'm going to set up this family business network, and which is what it did. And very, very simply, in one line, it's by families for families. Because it's peer-to-peer networking, it's confidentiality, it's about giving mutual support, but also mutual energy, and helping people, build up their energy and face challenges. And it's also at about a wider stage, which is what the network has been working on. It's about, you might say, a sort of voice of family business, and what does that mean, and what does that mean for Ireland Inc., because that can get lost in the stampede to the multinational nirvana, which is fine if it's there, but and of course it's very, very important. But don't forget the people who are always going to be here keeping the lights on.
I think that's a very important piece. There's a couple of really important things I want to jump into there. But that's a very important piece. There is this putting them on a pedestal of foreign multinationals coming in, and it's important. Don't get me wrong. Dublin's largely been built on that in the last 15 years, but there almost is an overlooking of traditional, in brackets, boring businesses that have just been around for so long that they're just part of the furniture, so it's often overlooked. But when you do run the numbers and you look at, right up the way from small self-employed people to large Irish-owned multinational or Irish-owned large companies, like that's what's driving the economy behind it all, in good times and bad.
Well, I think it's the power of the and. I mean, you have to have both. And look at where we are. I mean, I'm not a particular expert in this. I obviously read it a lot. I mean, one of the reasons, but this is sort of jumping forward a little bit, why I stepped, once I set up the network, and we might come back to that, but once I did it, as I realized other people could speak to this piece a little bit better than I could. But I suppose it is just trying to sort of get a handle on what the contribution of family businesses can be. I mean, I've heard family businesses described as a nation without a country, which I think is a very nice way of putting it. I mean, for me, again, it's always very tempting to sort of jump forward to what it might look like. At the time, I had to see whether this thing was going to work. And we spoke about timing as being important for entrepreneurs. And I suppose one of the first things I learned, that if you're going to set something up, do it wrong a first time and then learn from that. And then, I mean, if you don't do it, find someone who has done it wrong and then has turned around and tried to done it in the right way. What I mean by that in this context, I think trying to do it tacked on to some sort of academic center or some sort of university just hadn't worked. I mean, for all the good intentions, because there's so many other different like agendas and priorities, research, education, anything. When I did it, I said, right, the only way this is going to work is, the families have to do it for themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
But that took time. I mean, you just can't go out on the street corner, looking out at the street here at the National Concert Hall and get your soapbox and start banging it. I mean, people will probably lock you up pretty quickly. What I had to do was through events, just booking at Enterprise Ireland. I suppose I was still at the time a director of our family company, so I was able to outline what we'd done. And the temptation is people there to say, oh no, well, that's all applies to a very, very large business. The issues are the same, but maybe the structures or the skills or the priorities or the approaches vary slightly as the business grows. But the core issues are the same. How do you keep the family and the business going? How do you keep the experiment going? I mean, you talk about the entrepreneur experiment, getting it set up. I mean, a family business really is, by definition, is trying to keep that experiment going. And I suppose back to your point about the family business voice, that, is something that is now recognized in many other countries in Europe. I mean, I've been to family business, I'm a Spanish speaker, so I've been to family business conferences in Spain. 3 days. The first day they have the Prime Minister. The second day they have the king speaking to them, and the third day he has to be there, the leader of the opposition. Or he or her has to be there, the leader of the opposition. So there they've realized.
It's heavy hitting, yeah.
Well, they are, and again, it has to be done in perspective. But these businesses want to stick by the country, want to see things done right. Not that anybody else doesn't, but I think it is. But I mean, honestly, this boils down to the first experiences of when we got the people together, because it wasn't just me. I went out, found 5 founder families. I got 12 families in a room in a hotel in Dublin and said, okay, this is what's been done elsewhere. These are the people I brought into the room. This is the issues that we're trying to face. This is kind of how we're trying to solve them here, or these are the gaps. What are we going to do? Of the 12 people there, 3 of 3 put up their hands and 4 say we'll be on the board. The next 3 say, yeah, this is for us. And the remainder saying thanks, but no thanks. I mean, not everyone's going to be convinced by this, absolutely. But we managed to sort of say, okay, let's just sort of get on with it and see if we can make it work. So I suppose I ran it for 5 years. And I suppose that really points to the from the point of view of the book I've written, that sort of entrepreneur successor, someone who is, maybe has the fortune to be attached to a family, and there's obviously benefits of that, but sometimes, potentially maybe finding your way is maybe that bit correspondingly trickier because you've got this sort of Banquo's ghost behind you. In a more practical way, it was trying to use that family association name in a positive way.
Yeah.
In part, I don't know how important that was, but I think it helped to say to others, well, let's just do this, and on we went.
We talked about this over coffee, the famous quote, family businesses go from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And what that means is the first generation make it, the second generation spend it, the third generation blow it.
Yeah, that can happen. I think the problem is, everybody likes a messy story and likes to talk and look at it. And, on the other side, family businesses can end for perfectly normal reasons why businesses change anyway. They get sold, the industry changes, the business morphs into different things, maybe it splits, and it ends up with 2 family businesses because siblings can't see eye to eye. The Adidas and Puma brands come to mind, which were 2 different brothers. And they just said, well, then there are 2 businesses, fine, let's keep going. But yeah, there is that element. And I suppose what you're trying to do in a peer-to-peer network and the education bit or the proximal learning around that for the change is to try and convince people or help people. The questions you're trying to answer really are quite straightforward. One is, do we want to remain as a family in business? If we do, how are we as a family going to work together in however that may be? And 3, once we've done that, how are we going to engage the successor generations? And they're the 3. Now, you can't solve on them in a morning with a PowerPoint. You have to give that time. But yes, there is a shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves piece. Sometimes it makes eminent sense that people go their own way. Maybe the business outgrows them. Maybe that the family isn't getting on well. And as I heard, I think it was a German family business owner, he has said a sick family cannot manage a healthy business. And sometimes you maybe have to recognize that. But honestly, the vast number of people that I met, were interested in the area, had their businesses, were so busy running them that they wanted to be able to, just take a little, back to your entrepreneur piece, take time out to meet peers and also be challenged.
You've written a great book, The Successor's Voice,
yes.
Speaking about a lot of these things.
Yes.
What are the main, if you could boil it down to a couple of the big challenges family businesses you see again and again and again run into? Because from a personal level, you've lived it. From a professional level, you've worked with probably hundreds of family businesses at this stage.
Yeah.
What are the key things?
I wouldn't say. I've seen, certainly seen a great many. If you look at, and I introduced this, the first thing I'd say about the book, it is not a tell-all on Musgrave. It is not about our business. In fact, I don't mention the business once in the whole book. I didn't feel the necessity to do that. I didn't think I was the right person to do that. In fact, it's been done before by the journalist Dan White. But to answer your question, at the beginning of the book, I outline, to keep family, to keep the experiment going. Family needs the economic engine, the asset growth, however you define that, and the businesses you go into or don't. It needs some sort of consensus within the family. So if you think about the stages of my career, the early years were spent around the asset growth bit, learning about the business. The next stage, as I said, was working within our own family as a family director, which was really that consensus piece, and all those pieces have been put in place. And learning about the responsibilities of ownership and of governance. But of course, the third and final piece, which is really what the book is about, is to keep the experiment going, you need family talent. You need family members who are motivated, who are interested, who are, yes, have the credibility, but also can add value, however they choose to define that. Not just by going and working in the family business. Of course, many family businesses are at that first generation stage where we only really want you to come in and work in it. I understand that, and a large part of the book is about that, those early stages and some of the lessons that I learned. But then there is this piece about different roles that family members can play, you know, either inside, outside, or alongside their family company, that can contribute to keeping the experience.
I like that. Inside, outside, or alongside. I think that's a really nice way of putting it.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it is. I mean, ultimately, if I look at the book and why I sat down to write it, and I think we discussed this earlier, I you know, if you're going to write a book, you have to say, well, what is a book that I would like to have read that hasn't been written yet? And this was it. Because I looked at the industry supporting family business. Clearly, they're focusing on the first two legs of that stool, which was the asset piece, strategy, growth, wealth, tax, all of that. Secondly, a lot of the people then run after the consensus piece, which is, you know, the area around family constitutions, family agreements, getting family to work together, and that relational stuff. I said, well, who's giving these successors? And by successor, I mean really any age and stage. They are successors to a family in business, or the next generation of successors. I don't like the term next generation, which is commonly used particularly by those providing services, because it seems to me to miss all the potential of those, particularly as a family grows and the business gets older, more experience, more legacy. As you begin to move away from running it yourself, you need good people to do governance. You need people to join and make agreements to sort of unify, bringing families together. You need even those people who are going to go into a room and start up conversations like you do with your entrepreneurs, but with the next generation of successors, the young people sitting in the corner who no one's paying any attention to. I mean, as Saint Benedict said, always speak to the youngest monk. You know, but the point is, and I've seen very good family business leaders, really quite impressive people in and around Europe, who come in and say, yeah, I do three things. I take care of the brand, and I make sure we're not messing around with the brand. I manage all those, you know, to use that word, stakeholder relationships, customers, suppliers. But the other bit I spend time on is I go and I sit down with the next generation of our family, with our successors, and give them a bit of time. Because that for them is nirvana. It is that, you know, and it is not just about talking up or saying, aren't we great, we own this, and I've never heard anybody in our family say that. It's about sharing, you know, back to reality, sharing the good news and the bad news, the things that worked well and it didn't go well. So I suppose really where I'm trying to get to with the book, it's a book I would have liked to have read, but it's written for successors, for you. So when they read it, I'm not talking like about them. I'm not talking about them or of them as some potential hook to get business to do constitution work or strategy work. I'm talking to them to take it and leave it or read it and say, well, at those particular moments in your career, when you're faced with these decisions, as I think I said, you know, another thing for writing a book is think about your ideal reader. Of course, coming from my experience, you know, when I looked at successors, I said, well, the successor who might read this book is someone who is surrounded by expectation, you know, knee deep in legacy, probably alone, and who is about to make an important decision, although I'm not certain of it, but possibly. That's who this book is for. It's a small market. It's very reasonably niche, but I think it needed to be done. Up to people, it's to sort of take it or leave it. So I suppose it's there to sort of help people and probably steer them a little bit away from some of the mistakes or some of the challenges. But on the other side, it's also, you know, in all this, you can't let the families off the hook. So what it also incorporates is principles around family talent. So if, as a family, you asked me earlier about those key things to keep the experiment going. Yes, we have the asset growth bit, however that may be. Yes, we have the family consensus. But a family in the main has to decide, well, what can our family talent, our family members bring? However we decide to define what talent is and at what stage. Some families don't want the family working in the company when it gets to a certain stage, but they may be involved in the actual philanthropic pieces, which is the social entrepreneurship. They may be involved in setting up a non-profit like I did, which is really outside of the business. But you're still, I hope, adding value to ownership over time.
What do you think was driving you? Because, you know, you're working for such a big name, a legacy company. You know, to many people on the outside looking in at you, Philip.
Sure.
You had it all. You have it all, you know. So what do you think was driving you to make your own mark, to go out and make your own stamp on things?
Well, I think I suppose ultimately, you want to be known for your first name, not your second one. I think that's important. I don't know whether I would have said that 30 years ago. I think also, to be fair to the business, and I'm not saying that the business could have done anything particularly different or whatever. I think also you have to realize is that one has particular aptitudes, and mine is on the writing, it's on the teaching, it's on the advocacy. Maybe it's the early stage organizing and all of those bits I've done. Maybe that basket of skills or group of skills maybe really wasn't absolutely relevant to the kind of roles that I maybe saw coming down the track. I think as well, to be perfectly frank, is getting involved in something like that with the expectation can be daunting and can become too much at times. And one of the, I've spoken about the book, how I've tried to split it out into these role profiles. Someone who's uninvolved, someone who's an actual career successor, someone who is an entrepreneur, a social entrepreneur, and I've explained how I did that. The other area is someone who transitions, because sometimes you may be involved in a family business or involved in a certain part of it and find, well, actually the role doesn't fit me anymore, or maybe I'm not bringing any value back. The sad thing is if you have to stay in that, for the rest of your life, which is probably not ideal. In my case, I certainly found it quite onerous at having set up a non-profit and then dealing with a lot of board issues and teaching at the time, that in the end I honestly had to take time out from the whole thing. And as I think I said to you earlier, this time 8 years ago, I was in hospital with all this stuff. And I sat down there and said, crikey, this is not good. First you just don't know where you are or what's going on. But I think I sort of realized, by that stage, I'd made the decision to step down. It was all done very well. Well, I hope it was. Done, vis-a-vis the company, within the family, perhaps not so easily received, and that can be a pity. But you have to keep on doing, because your first priority is to have that skills and recognizing when you're trying to do too much. I don't think I would have been able to parse that or explain that at the time. I was just trying to keep my head above water. But over time, I've learned to realize and say, well, actually, I've made my contribution there. I've now moved on and moved into other areas, which of course is the whole writing, and I think being an advocate and trying to push the message out around this area of family talent.
You found yourself, essentially. You found through taking that step back.
Yes, and I think possibly find one's aptitude. I think one also has to realize, and to be fair to the family and the business, if you're going to be involved in that size of a company, you've got to have a lot of energy. You've got to thrive on that consistent, go do piece. I think I've done a lot of that. Maybe it was my body saying to me, well, actually, this really isn't you long term. Maybe you have a more creative pattern, which means intense work and looking at things, and then downtime and time out away from it. When you're involved at that level, and as much as I probably was and probably thinking about it, you just don't switch off. And that's not a great thing to be. So I'm hoping, I don't deal with this expressly in the book, but I certainly point to that challenge of transitioning. And we hear people about pivoting. I see the word pivoting. I don't like it. Why? Because it implies that it's done quickly. It's rather easy. You just, swizzle on a dime. It isn't like that. It's very messy in the middle, and there are people who've studied this, career transitioning. But I also think this is relevant for your listeners or any people out there who have got to the point where they've learned a lot and have got a business idea or a non-profit idea. But that real leap, well, will I go and, start my own entrepreneur experiment? Listen to your subconscious, write things down, because somewhere inside of you, something's telling you, maybe this fitted for you in your 20s or in your 30s, but maybe it won't fit for you now. I don't know whether you can learn that, whether it's a skill, whether you just have to keep on going until that happens. But I think there is something in that. And for me, it was probably looking at the role, saying, okay, I've done 10 years, but there's other things that I want to do. I honestly don't think I would have been able to write the book if I'd been still involved, because I just wouldn't have had the headspace. And, let's be absolutely honest, I've been able to do some of these moves because I have some level of private income, not enormous as you might think, but it's enough. And also there have been other people there who I have huge time for who've taken up the mantle. You know, this is not all about me nor anything like. You're part of a distributed group. I think the challenge is for a successor is to find those parts of, let's call it your own dream or your own area of contribution that sort of matches into or links into what the family business needs over time. Whether that's a business piece, whether that's the unifiers or those ownership successors who do the constitutions that work together, or whether it's someone like me now, as I think I'm setting out my stall because of interest in other people, and I think back into my own family when I do re-engage again in the wider sense, just in one area, which is around family talent. So if there are people out there of the successor generation, certainly from our family, who want to make a go of it and work, I'm right there with them.
I love that. You've shared a lot there, and thank you for being so honest, by the way. Thank you for revealing that, you know, it's a struggle as well. Even I think a lot of people, we always put people on pedestals. People look at Philip and go, Philip's so successful. But it got to a point where you were so, you know, it was such a weight that you ended up in hospital. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs have that conflict. And I think it's probably doubly so. You've given us an absolute masterclass there on family business and succession. So first of all, thank you. That was
well. It's from an angle. I mean, it's a certain angle. It isn't.
It is, but you know, don't downplay it. Like you've given us such an insight there, and
30 years of growing.
But you've managed to share it in a way that's your experience but relevant, and I think that's so important because. You know, it's often very hard to put yourself in other people's shoes, but when you share your own experience, it just opens it up to people to relate to it and go, people ask me, what do I want when they come on the pod? And I'm like, I want just one person listening to go, aha, that's it. Yeah. That's the struggle I've been having.
I actually wrote the book, Gary. I mean, it's certainly not about me. And again, it's, as I said, it's not about the business, because I would never do that, because I have great admiration for the people, for many or almost all the people in my own family and any of the customers I work with. But it's about finding a bit, I think, that works for you, i.e. for me, but that also takes account maybe that, you know, certain things at times can become too much. So it's about learning your pattern of what energizes you, what you want to do, but also knowing where the bear traps are, and knowing that if you go too far down a certain route, that you only learn by experience, and also mistakes or things that have happened. But certainly, you know, in the family business succession piece, of course, there's going to be those having, you know, huge input to the whole asset growth and tax and all that. I mean, that's vitally important. There are those now who, of course, are working on getting the families in the room and getting them talking, which is what we try to do with the FBN, because a lot of families, when they came into those meetings, Gary sort of, gosh, I didn't realize there were other families going through this stuff. It's amazing. Yeah, wow, look at you.
Everyone thinks they're special little flowers. You know, everything thinks their problems are unique to them.
They're so focused on their businesses. Yeah. They're so focused. But what I'm trying to do is say, okay, how can we think a little bit differently about family talent if we're trying to move this entrepreneur experiment on, but also giving the agency, given the decision, given a little bit of the insight, hopefully a little bit early, because like you asked me about when I joined the company, it's you know, you are a little bit like ahead of your headlights in terms of people's expectations, and you know, you are really a leader in a family business before you have any followers, you know, which is a counterintuitive way I'm actually looking at it. What I'm trying to do is sort of look at it and say, okay, what can I put down on paper? It isn't, but it also is, I'm hoping to develop it into some sort of system which can be taken up by families to, particularly with the successors in mind, however they may want to make a contribution, because not everybody wants to work on it, not everyone wants to set stuff up. There are many other ways that people can contribute to ownership, if that's what they believe is important. I
think that's very important, the bit you highlighted there. You know, you can be involved. It's not binary. It's not like you're in or you're out. I think sometimes we have these very binary views of things, and especially with a family business, it's probably extra binary because you're in the family or you're outside the family business. You have to follow that path. I think you've given a beautiful message there that applies across all businesses. You know, there's many ways to be involved. You know, you can be working alongside, inside, in different ways, social. And I think that's very important.
I mean, the most basic way of being involved, Gary, is to is to support your cousins and to support those family members who are trying to, get involved and or are doing stuff. And of course, I'm well aware there's the sibling rivalry piece. I'm well aware sometimes people don't like to see the next generation coming up and can feel threatened by that. And you can get behaviors all around that. But what I do write about in the book, I think if it's the one thing you can bring in as a successor to your family, it's generosity. It's generosity to realize that that being in that role, like doing a family director role I did, is, family business leadership is three things. It's interesting, it's varied, but it's thankless. It's thankless because it really is paid forward. It's thankless because there are, you have to manage so many different areas. The ownership, the business bit, it impacts on your family relationships. And as I've shown, it impacts on your personal sense of self. And you've got to try and manage. So in the book, having come through and learned to do coaching and mentoring, I've come up with a coaching model and a sort of a mentoring model that hopefully successors can use with the people with whom they are working. Because that's what this book is designed. It's to help those who work with successors say, well, let's look at this a little differently. I'm not saying it's going to solve all the problems. I'm not saying it has answers. Maybe it just helps people manage the situations a little bit better in where they find themselves, and helps them ultimately to find their own voice, whatever that might mean.
Beautiful. I ask every guest to recommend a book.
Yes.
You can't recommend your own book.
I wouldn't dream of doing that.
We're going to plug that at the end.
We are. Well,
what book would you recommend people read?
I spent a bit of time going through all of your podcasts and looking at the profile of your listeners, so I hope what I've said hasn't bored the living life out of them all. But I bought a book about a month ago by a guy called Greg Mackeown, no relation. It's called Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. And really, he has come up with a system which really, I think, would be very helpful for an entrepreneur or somebody, really jumping in and getting a lot done, which really points to exactly that. How do you strip back to the essential? What are the process stages? The essence of who or what you are, exploration, how you eliminate stuff out. I mean, how do you even say no? I mean, one of the challenges that I would have as a successor, and this is, I write about it in the book, but of course when you're part of a large business like ours, sometimes people want you to hang your name on their cause or on their thing. Some of them may be very worthy, but you can't do it all. So how do you say no in a very nice way? Not being selfish or entitled, but just realizing that you can't spread yourself too thin. So that's a book that I would certainly recommend. Very straightforward, very, very easy to read, and well written, and also built on a lot of empirical. This guy has gone out and talked to an awful lot of people. So
I definitely think what you've given us there over the last hour is there will be a lot of people listening here in family businesses. A lot of pennies I think will have dropped over the last hour, because
well, I hope so.
You told it in a very engaging way and through your own voice. Excuse the pun.
No.
So your book is called The Successor's Voice. Where can people find out a little bit more, and most importantly, where can they buy it?
Okay, well, the Successor's Voice is leadership lessons learned as a successor to a family and business. It is published by Management Books 2000 from the UK. It's available on Amazon or on the Book Depository, and it's available as a published book or as an ebook. I would like to have it in my independent bookstores here, but I haven't quite got there yet. But it is on Amazon. And people can find out more about it on my website, philipmackeown.ie. And there's a little bit, and there is I've added a PDF to the contents and to the index. And also I've read an awful lot around this stuff, so people want to follow on. What I've done as well, Gary, finally, is I brought 2 copies of the book with me.
Yes.
For the show. Hopefully you haven't written all over that one.
I have not. I do write all over my books, but I have not written all over that one yet.
I saw you colouring it in earlier, but no, Gary doesn't colour. He only thinks.
Unless there's the numbers. I need the number colouring.
The numbers. Yeah, everybody loves the numbers. But what I thought might be nice is, if you're happy with this, is that maybe your listeners, the 2 copies for the show, maybe your listeners might like to recommend to you whether there is a successor, however they choose to define, someone who's maybe started a family business, working, maybe thinking about it, maybe developing a career, or they know that they're looking at their family governance or whatever. If they could recommend a successor known to them, who they think would be worthy recipients, I would love to have this.
What we'll do is, I have a good idea here. What we'll do is we'll put the 2 of these copies up to give away. We will do this on LinkedIn. I think that's the most obvious place to do this, because our main listeners are there. What I'll do is the day this pod goes live, I will put up a post on LinkedIn. You'll tag it, you'll like it, you'll share it, and then we'll get people to tag who they believe should read this, and we'll give away 2 copies of the book. Philip.
And it should go to successors. So to somebody who's in the hot seat.
Absolutely. Someone who needs to read it.
They may not want to read it, and they may say, thanks, no, I don't like him. But at least
they'll pick something up out of it.
And if they don't like it, they can give it to somebody else.
Exactly. Pay it forward. Philip.
It's like a chain letter.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for your time, and thank you to your listeners. I mean, I hope it's been helpful.
I think it definitely
thank
has.
you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Wherever you're listening, whether it's Spotify, YouTube, or Apple, click that subscribe button, and I will see you back here next week for a brand new podcast.